A year ago, December 14th, 2020, In Strang Woods was released, and to this day I think about it often. It's a podcast musical from Atypical Artists with creators Jeff Luppino-Esposito, Brett Ryback, and Matt Sav, and if you have not listened to it, you really, really must. I would like to convince you that it's not merely entertainment, but art. I think it's literature. It's profound, tragic. These characters are caught between competing drives and goods. It's ironic. It's full of personalities that are hard to forget and that feel more human than we do. Howl, in particular, feels very Shakespearean to me. And the story is skillfully crafted to discuss his life without overly focusing on him. Each character brings their own complexity and depth to the narrative. Paraquin, Eric, I can go on. And it's also going to be discussing some of the challenges we all find today in modern life, post-modernity or meta-modernity, whichever phrase you use. And of course, the world is always a mixture of all of these things. And the story is really going to, I think, speak on some of the tensions we find ourselves in, especially under COVID, where the world feels like it can fall apart at any moment and we can never do enough. I'm going to go by episode. If you have not listened to In Strang Woods, you really should not be listening to this recording. Please come back after you've listened to it. There will be spoilers, many spoilers, and it will be difficult for you to enjoy the work if you listen to this, and I would feel awful if I ruined your experience. So please go listen to In Strang Woods. It's easy to find. Just go to Google, type it in. I think it's on Apple Podcasts, and there are also links in the Medium article. And what I discuss here will not be the entire Medium article, where I try to point out different observations, fragments, things like that about each episode, but I will be going over some of the main points. Before continuing, I want to note that I've seen some criticisms where people simply say, oh, true crime and musical, these genres, they don't go together. And I just would like to note that I think this is a ridiculous criticism, frankly. You can't critique opera as being bad if you don't like opera. You can't say a book is bad because you don't like reading. A valid critique has to accept and be open to what is presented, to the work as it is presented, and what it is. And if you're not so open, then of course you're not going to like it. I think, frankly, the combination of true crime and musical makes it possible for us to really feel something. The emotions of this work are so powerful and it's so easy to resonate with it. And I think that's partly because it's so different. It brings to mind something Walker Percy once said about the only way we can really appreciate a Shakespearean sonnet anymore is by finding it in a biology classroom on a dissection board. And I know that's a silly idea, but what he's trying to say is that so often our ideas of Shakespeare are captured by preset complexes. And when we walk into a classroom, we go into the mode of that preset complex to dissect the poem, to pull out the main themes, the history of it, so on and so forth. And as a result, it becomes more difficult to hit us. In a similar way, by In Strang Woods being a musical, I think the mystery and the tragedy and the difficulty that the characters go through actually can strike us and really hit us because we can't so easily wrap it in a preset complex. So I actually think the combination of genres that In Strang Woods introduces is part of the genius. Episode 1 is called A Man Who Cannot Be Saved, which I think is an excellent title, really hooks you. And to start, just note the technical skill. How the music grows in with the sound effects, then the perfect blending of the voiceover, and now the singing, the violin. Just take a moment to marvel at the technical dexterity. And don't forget, the ISW team, I'll use ISW for short, for In Strang Woods, they had to compose, arrange, time plan, and write everything you're hearing. One of the problems with great art is that it makes everything seem easy. The way the music, the technical, everything, the voiceovers, it all just seems to flow, and it all just seems magical, dare I say. It just seems like it had to have happened. One of the great tensions that artists work with is that they work really, really hard to make it seem like what they do is easy. And so it's easy to not think that what they did was hard. But it's extraordinarily difficult. And In Strang Woods will make it seem like was an effortless creation, but I cannot imagine all the hours that went into this work. So that's the first thing I think that needs to be noted. And I'm also going to make quite a few comments on the writing itself, the skill of the dialogue. See, we have this part where Howl is on the phone, and the Howl could be a Ginsberg reference to the poem, I saw the greatest minds of my generation, and so on. But notice this dialogue where he's on the phone, where he says, I found the boy, comma, the missing boy, and waits before adding, I found his body. The writers could have started by having Howl just say, I found the body of the missing boy, but instead they withheld the data a little bit. They built tension. Notice how that builds tension. Notice how that kind of creates drama. And also notice how it builds the character of Howl. It also just doesn't sound like Howl would say something like, I found the body of the missing boy. It just doesn't sound like Howl. So the writers of ISW accomplished a double goal. They made Howl sound like himself while at the same time building dramatic tension. ISW does this kind of thing, this skill of writing, so often and so much that I couldn't possibly point it out, but I wanted to make an example of that here. To note that when you sent out to write a script, you would go, oh, well, what's the key information? Oh, he found the boy. So the sentence you just kind of you just write down the dialogue, I found the body of the missing boy, and you don't think much of it. But to step back, as the writers must have been said, no. Let's instead say, I found the boy, the missing boy. I found his body. Don't you hear how much more dramatic and kind of powerful that is? And again, for all writers listening to this, note that move, as opposed to just getting the information out quickly. How the dialogue is delivered in a manner that delivers the information, yes, but also builds tension, and it sounds like the character that they're trying to build, and that would be Howl in this instant. Peregrine is not forced to attend her brother's Virgil, the brother who has passed away after the party, and her mom notes that she felt like she shouldn't force Peregrine to attend, dropping the painful line, I didn't want to lose my daughter too. I should note that going back a year later and reviewing In Strang Woods, it's amazing how I can still hear that dialogue, that line in my head so easily, so beautifully. It's amazing how music does that. You remember music so well, and the writing in Strang Woods is indeed musical. Peregrine's mom here is suggesting that it's not always easy to know how to keep loved ones. Is it by forcing them to be with us or letting them have their own space? In life, we take risk, and very often I find many television programs, movies, and stuff like that, they kind of make it obvious what constitutes the right course. But a reason ISW is art is precisely that it's true to life, and in life, what's right is rarely obvious to us. And that's going to be something that is explored. And in fact, there's going to be some suggestions that being clear about what you think is right may actually get you into trouble or not be so good. And there's going to be this interesting exploration of what it means to stay clear, the good, the bad, and all of these different things that will be explored in Strang Woods. There's this truly heartbreaking line where Peregrine is recalling her brother Jacob, and she says, Jacob told her, when something happens, come and find me. Well, he's passed away now, and this line is just so moving. When something happens, come and find me. Well, she can't now. And so it's just utterly tragic and moving. So now she has to find herself, it would seem. But what will that mean? And how does she do that? And I love this line too. He was good to talk to on the road, which suggests that Jacob provided stability and comfort during the transitions of life. Their father left. And so Jacob has this ability to kind of provide stability. And so, Peregrine, with her dad being gone, she doesn't really have much support for the twists and turns of life. And now she's lost even more support. And so it would make sense that she'd want to become self-sufficient, as she's going to go off and do with Howl. So it's brilliant how the writing is done to make that move of Peregrine make sense. It doesn't feel poured in from the top with the action. And I will also note that this loss of Jacob and this loss of stability, Peregrine doesn't have the stability anymore, really, I think, speaks to the modern world. And we have that sociology book on belonging again, where we no longer have givens. It's no longer given what we should do. We have much more choice. It's not necessarily given that we should get married and have kids, or that we should have a career. The thoughtless, the things we don't think about. Thoughtless was not a simile for stupid, but the thoughtless things that we just kind of do to organize our lives, which in some respects can be constraining, they can constrict us, but in other ways, they can guide us. People, when we have too much freedom, we can sometimes be existentially overwhelmed, but when we have too little freedom, we can feel oppressed. So we need this balance between freedoms and givens, to use that language from Peter Berger and Charles Taylor and those sociologists. But if we don't have enough givens, then we can be overwhelmed. And in Peregrine losing Jacob sees an example of someone now who doesn't have enough givens, it would seem. So he doesn't have enough direction, so he's existentially destabilized. I also thought it was quite funny, some of the exchanges in Chapter 1, Episode 1, with the kids putting down their phones as if they're not taking life seriously by always being on their phones, is kind of how the adults play. But there's this real question: if we don't have survival skills like Howl, how are any of us prepared for life? If we're not living like Howl is, are we really any different than kids that are always on their phone, not really taking quote unquote real life seriously? It's almost as if none of us take real life seriously unless we do what Howl is doing. So it's kind of funny to think about the adults picking on the kids for always being on their phones, which, there is indeed problems with always being on your phone, but there's also a sense that none of us really take life seriously, that none of us are really paying attention to life unless we live like Hal. I think the next thing that I find interesting is how In Strang Woods explores the tension between accepting accidents and also preparing oneself to prevent accidents from happening. There really is something horrifying about the reality of accidents, like car wrecks or people getting lost in the woods, because can you really ever prepare for them? And I mean, there's always something that could occur, and yet when an accident like this happens, our entire life can be ruined. So that's a real tension. So we live in infinite paranoia of getting prepared for something that might happen or not. We have to make these decisions. I also think it's kind of interesting to explore how an accident, in one sense, is existentially relieving because they're not in our control, so we don't feel responsible for them, but at the same time they're existentially terrifying precisely because we don't control them. So there's this interesting tension here. The part also where Peregrine kind of gets mad and says, like, if Dad had done his job, Jacob would still be alive, I found quite powerful. And it begs the question, though, does Peregrine know what he's asking? Is he thinking that men should go back to, say, toxic masculinity, where they're taking their kids out and like making them tough? But is all masculinity toxic though? Maybe there's a balance. Is Howl an example of toxic masculinity, or is he the good kind of masculinity that we actually need? I've never taken concerns about toxic masculinity to be saying that all masculinity is bad, but it's not actually easy to draw the line, right? And sometimes it's easier to critique than to assert the positive version. And that doesn't mean critique is bad, but it does mean that it can be difficult to know what exactly we're asking for and what we want. And here, when Peregrine is so upset and hurt, all she can do is kind of blame her father for not teaching them certain skills and or preparing them for the real world. But what exactly would that look like? Well, it's not so clear. Now she's going to go off and meet Howl, and we'll find out. But I also want to bring attention to this part where she's like, now I have to wrestle with this fear, this idea that this accident has occurred, and now she has this weighing on her shoulder all of her days, that she has to live her life. And we all live our lives constantly flirting with the possibility of something happening that becomes a this per se, a thing we could have avoided but didn't. But really, could we have done anything different? Sometimes we think we could have done something different, but really, could we have? So this idea of this existential weight we have to weigh, I don't really find it expressed very much in art, and I really appreciate it being here in Strang Woods. And it brings to mind when Hal says, I like the quiet, it brings to mind kind of this idea that you're escaping, you're in a clearing, to allude to the final episode, an oasis where you're free from the possibility of any this being on your shoulder, or there being any this. So I associated Howl's I like the quiet with living with and escaping the this, perhaps. I think the song "A Man Who Cannot Be Saved" is wonderful, and we discover at the end of In Strang Woods how this is self-referential, despite the fact that Howl possesses incredible survival skills. And certainly, if Howl can end up in trouble, can anyone be saved? Are any of us someone who can be saved? That it begs the question. I also love the line about how so many lives are defined by making an emotional decision at a critical time. I think that's magnificent, and I think that's true, that many things that happen to us and our lives in general are defined by these emotional decisions at critical times. And knowing that critical times will arise, what should we do? Should we go learn survival skills? Should we learn to be prepared for everything life could throw at us? Or should we isolate ourselves from people, knowing all of the difficulties that people are going to bring our way? And I really want to also note that just episode 1 arises to all of these questions. These examples of brilliant writing. These are the things that we find in true literature, truly great art. It's just In Strang Woods is full to the brim with them. Episode 2, called Dead Reckoning, is again another wonderful work, and it contains just an utterly stunning song called Something So Pure. And to start, don't you love how each episode starts off with this song that leaves out a resolution note? You know, it has that theme song, but the resolution note is cut off. I think that's just a really smart way to make listeners instantly feel invested in the program. And the really great start of the episode where it says, I wanted to know what it's like to be lost, really lost. And there's kind of an irony here, because arguably today in the modern world, we in fact feel really lost with COVID, politics falling apart, and so on and so forth. We feel very lost, and do we like that very much? I don't think so. There seems to be a lot of trouble, and yet we don't really know if we have what it takes to survive, if we truly are prepared, unless we go through a situation like this. So there's a kind of irony there where we need to feel really lost to feel like we can really rise to the occasion, to really find out if we can, and yet that would be terrible to actually happen. So there's an interesting tension there. I also really like the description in this episode where it says the forest is a thick expanse of greenery that looks terrifyingly the same in every direction. And this just made me think of The Secular Age by Charles Taylor. It made me think about how every town in America now has a McDonald's, a Walmart, and a Kmart, how there's this sameness to everything, which brings to mind the work of Walter Benjamin and the loss of aura that can happen when art is mass-produced. And there's also this idea of push into the field until it shatters. And, you know, what's interesting about this is, you know, Peregrine during the training in the song, it's a great song, you know, push into the fear until it shatters. I think the name of the song is Shatters. And there's this kind of idea where because they push into the fear, they go through this experience with Howl, which ultimately is going to get them into the final where they end up lost. So is it always good to push into the fear? Maybe not. But then again, should we just live with fear and be afraid? It would seem like we need to push into it. Another thing for the writers out there, notice how you probably still remember the rule of threes, you know, that what they use in the survival training. This is kind of an example of how a repeating theme and pattern is hard to forget. It's a really good method for writing. There's also Peregrine will lament in her songs being alone, and how hard it is to be alone. But do note, what is Howl? Howl is alone, and in some respects he seems like he's better off to be alone because he doesn't have to worry about parents worrying about him or the people having expectations. He seems like he can do what he wants to do. And also, when we're attached and we're in relationships, that can put different psychological pressures on us. So it's interesting how we don't want to be alone, but then at the same time want to be alone. We're kind of a walking contradiction that way. I think this song will be reprised brilliantly in episode 3 on this I Know This Girl, which Peregrine's mother sings about Peregrine. I think this is a brilliant song, and it really plays on the idea, and all of In Strang Woods will, on the idea of what it means to know someone, and if we ever really know people. And, you know, do we really know how if in episode 4 he can have this whole backstory that undermines everything we thought about them? Do we really know what we're getting ourselves into if Peregrine and the other kids can get so well trained and then they end up in the final and have no idea what they're going to do, or they feel stuck and lost? So this idea of knowing a person or knowing what we're getting ourselves into, you know, sometimes it's questionable if we can even do it, if we can ever know what we're doing or getting into. This Marcus Aurelius-inspired idea, the Stoics of how that he says when Brett comes to visit him, life is disappointment. Disappointment affects you because you have the opposite expectation. So there's this idea here that we're prepared for life if we expect it to make us miserable. But, Is this really Howl's philosophy, or is this simply what he has fallen into after he's been disappointed, after life has let him down? There's a question of if this is really his life philosophy or something he's more so retrospectively come up with. This part also, too, where he asked Brett, what would you do if you were in a car wreck? That was really fantastic, because it also makes us as the audience wonder what we would do if we were in a car wreck and stranded on the side of the road, bleeding, dizzy, losing fluids. I just thought that was really good. And I also really like when Brett, he's talking to Howl, and he's like, isn't it kind of inappropriate to have these kids out in the woods training? And Howl's like, I was a kid when I was sent to Vietnam. Nobody seemed to think that was inappropriate. Man, that was really a great comeback. And it catches the audience off guard, because it's kind of funny. We really sympathize with Brett when he's telling Howl this might be inappropriate to have the kids out here training. And then as soon as we hear Howl's reply, we can switch sides. And I think that also kind of unveils how, frankly, most of us go through life. We follow an idea. We have it be our guiding principle, the thing according to which we determine our dead reckoning. And this entire episode is going to play on the idea of dead reckoning, on these standards we use to guide our lives, and how they feel like they're hard earned and they're really well thought out, but often maybe it's more so the case that we're just going along with the last thing we heard. And the same with as kind of symbolized, I think, in this exchange between Howl and Brett. And really what we think is a hard guiding principle might just be something more that we've absorbed and not really thought about very much. The song that comes next, Something So Pure, I've listened to on repeat in a very large number of times, and I think it is just a masterful song, how it's sung, where Howl sings it, and then Gerda only comes in when she's saying, come in, the water is warm, on this idea of come into love, come into a relationship, come outside your shell, but it sounds so beautiful with the guitar. Really an extraordinary track. I like this idea, too, that Gerda's a photographer. She frames the world. Does that mean she faces it, or she simply frames it? She freezes it, where she's always protected from really encountering the world. And Howl falls in love with her. Does he love her because he loves this ability to be idealistic? But maybe she's only able to be idealistic precisely because he's hiding behind her camera. These are all questions that arise because of this idea of Gerda being a photographer, which I thought was a brilliant move, just absolutely brilliant. And it also worked with the story because it gave him reason to go to all these different places of war, in her being a war photographer. So there's a deep symbolic, metaphoric meaning there, and there's also a good way to drive the action of the story. So very good writing. And just this part where she also says, hold still, I see you, don't move. That's believable because he's a photographer taking her picture. But it's also this idea of being recognized, of being seen, where for his whole life, perhaps his family did not recognize him in the way that he wanted to. He was not in favor of the family business going into weapons of war, would have preferred space, rockets, things like that, and was not appreciated. So maybe this is the first time he's seen. But there's also this idea of don't move, freeze this moment. And is there something about freezing these moments, these good moments, that actually are cheap, stolen? This is where suddenly Howl starts to not be able to connect with Gerda, because it starts to feel like their happiness is fake, like it's not allowed. This world is so messed up to have happiness. How can we do it? It's just not right. It feels immoral, it seems, to Howl. And I just find this so literary and tragic that this is happening to Howl. And to us, it may, it may seem silly that Howl leaves Gerda. But if we really understand what it is like to be around someone who you should feel happy around but can't because of your experience, that can be quite a torturous experience. And so we need to start maybe sympathizing with Howl a little more. And again, it's very literary, in this inability to be with Gerda. That is a result of what he's gone through, situations he didn't necessarily ask for, just found himself thrown into. I also want to note, from a technical standpoint, the extraordinary part where Gerda sings, or must I live with this pain for whatever remains of my days? And the very next line we hear is Howl telling us that she died in Israel, which is just a punch to the gut. It is brilliant writing because it tells us her pain came to an end, and yet it didn't tell us that at all. We don't know that her pain came to, does pain really end at death? Is that an idea that pain ended there, or is that just the end of her days? The pain could have easily stayed with her all that time. So I thought the writing there was extraordinary. I would also note how Howl uses this word bequeaths. He had bequeathed me this house. That's this land. The use of the word bequeath there is brilliant because it says so much about Howl's character, and it's also believable. And I also want you to note how Gerda doesn't say "I love you" until the climax, right when Howl walks out. We know they love each other, but she saves the phrase "I love you" until that really tragic moment. And I felt that was very Tolstoyan. You see stuff like that in Tolstoy too, where characters will have a dream, these very climactic high moments where a baby is born and then the first thing they feel is disgust. It feels like Tolstoy, and it feels true to life because that's how we as human beings can be. So those are all very, I think, extraordinary moves in the writing that should be paid attention to. And I think there really is in Howl an incredible Shakespearean dilemma, and hopefully you'll see in the written piece where I try to elaborate on this, where he knows his relationship with Gerda is beautiful and pure, but it just seems like he can't feel it. It feels like it must be that Howl feels like he's tricking himself. That he's tricking himself to think life can be good when he knows it's not. And this idea will be sung about by Peregrine in the final episode. And I just want to note the brilliance of the writing here in this character of Howl and the tragedy of this character. It feels very Shakespearean to me. I also think we do see evidence in this episode that Pink Ninja 236 is correct, that the Brett Ryback, which is the name of the character, Brett, but also the name of the actor, the actual actor, which is a brilliant move also in the writing. It's very meta, but it works well because it's this idea that Brett is not part of the story, but he's increasingly pulled into the story. And the more involved he is in the story, the more songs that he will participate in and sing. And I think that that's shown in this episode and is really fantastic. And I also think the title, Dead Reckoning, is brilliant because it's a reliable guide. Is the premise life is disappointment a reliable guide? Well, it would save us from disappointment because we expect it, but then we're just ending up in disappointment if we accept it. Rather, we avoid expecting disappointment because we go on and suffer it. And so I think the title Dead Reckoning, there's a lot of ways it plays through this episode that are just stunning. Is leaving Gerda an example of following the truth because the world is tough and miserable, and so staying with her would be a denial of the objective truth. So is Howl, by leaving Gerda, following a dead reckoning, or is he just going toward death? I also will note that the final solo line that Gerda sings is "Will you ever come find me?" which again is which is answered to, which is addressed arguably by the very last episode and the possibilities of what may have happened to Howl. Episode 3 alone has this really important line where Peregrine's mother trying to figure out what to do with Peregrine, to let her keep training with Howl, to not. So he says, I just sometimes feel like I've lost faith in my ability to know what to do. This has just been a theme throughout the story, and as I said, I just think it's such a magnificent theme because it perfectly matches with how we can feel today in modernity, under COVID, all the conspiracies, all the different fake news, what do we think? It's hard to know. It can feel like we've lost faith in our ability to know what to do. It's very confusing. And it's a great line to use in this chapter because we just left the chapter called Dead Reckoning, which was all about having a standard by which to know what to do. And now we don't know what to do. We can feel alone. We can feel confused. And the title again is Alone. I also like the tension with Peregrine's uncle, where he kind of feels like he has to be the disciplinarian because no one else will be. He can't tell if there's this tension as a parent between being too hard and too soft, and if you're too hard you'll lose your kids, but if you're too soft something bad will happen to them. And I really thought that captured that tension well. I thought the twist of the bear at the party is a great way to push the story forward, and a great way to have the town put faith in Peregrine and her team. I also love the idea of the turkey drop and the song about getting ready for the turkey drop, the tradition of the turkey drop, just all those characteristics of the way to make this world feel alive. I thought was very well constructed. And I love the turkey drop because it feels like something that a family really would do, that people would make a tradition around, that's kind of silly and yet something that people do. And I really like that. When the bear shows up, do we think that Howl not showing up is evidence that he trusted the kids or that he didn't care what happened to him? That's a question I had. Obviously, Howl may not have known that the bear was even happening, but we have reason to think that he may have been involved somehow. It's not clear, just by the mysterious descriptions of the bear at the end of the episode. So do we think it's a sign of love for Howl not to come and let the kids do this on their own, or do we think it's a sign of neglect? That was a question I had, which I thought was a very interesting question. I think we find that all the time. Do we need to always be there for the people that we love, if we really love them, or is sometimes not being there a sign of trust? I also really like this line, this dialogue. The bear just wanted to get the turkey, obviously, but the dog kept charging at him. It was this cycle that wasn't going to end unless we did something. This whole episode has shown all these cycles of the parents not being worried about the kids wanting to be given a chance to prove themselves, and back and forth, and discipline and pain, these cycles that they've been trapped in, and that the whole town has been trapped in. And it's not until the bear shows up, this surprise situation, that the children are given an opportunity to show off their skills. And it's because of this that the town begins to trust in them and to let them do the final, and they stop being suspicious of Howl. It's because of the surprise situation. Now, we've also throughout the story had surprise situations be precisely what ruins people's lives. Jacob gets lost and dies. Brett's parents are killed in a car wreck. So surprise situations can ruin lives, but they also can provide opportunity to show that we're ready. But they won't show that we're ready unless we're prepared for them. And it's kind of like a situation with the bear. That has to be surprise, because who in the world would willingly choose to submit themselves to that kind of risk? That would be irrational and crazy. But once it has occurred, it's an opportunity. Or, the kids went out there and they weren't prepared, they could get killed, so it could be a disaster. And there's this really, it made me think about this interesting tension between how surprise situations are an opportunity to change, to escape these cycles where nothing ever gets better, or it's just back and forth forever. And yet there are also the situations that can ruin us, and often those cycles that won't end occur precisely because people are worried about a surprise situation or something unexpected happening that ruins people's lives or has long-term consequences. So there's this difficult tension there that we all have to figure out with life that I think is very, very literary. And I want to note that the song sung by Peregrine's mother about "I Know This Girl" is really tremendous. But there's also a literary irony here where she's saying, I know this girl, she's so brave and free. But is Kathy here, which is Peregrine's mother, is she taking maybe more credit than she should? Does she really know this girl? Is this really the girl who she brought up and trained to be ready for what life would bring? It seems more like Howl did all the work. So there's this beautiful song, and it's just precisely because it's so beautiful and the lyrics are so upbeat that who would dare to bring a cynical reading to it? But there's grounds for a more cynical reading, because to Kathy really raise Peregrine to be prepared for this situation. She also Kathy had this line where she said she was fearless and free to describe Peregrine, which is to suggest that we really aren't free unless we're fearless, that we have to face our fears to be free. And that would require being prepared, because if we're prepared, we're not afraid, and that can help us be free when a situation like this arises. But as we're going to elaborate on, one is prepared in order to avoid vulnerability. You don't want to be vulnerable to situations, but vulnerability is unavoidable if you're going to be in relationship with people, if you're going to be with people, if you're going to be part of a town. You can't escape it. So how do we learn to be fearless in vulnerability? That would seem to be the challenge of relationships. And if we can't learn to be fearless in vulnerability, how can we be free? It would be suggested here we cannot. And I also really like how this episode ends with kind of a mystery about the bear, which could perhaps be picked up in another season. It doesn't have to be. I think the question is not so hanging that it demands an answer. And perhaps Howl set up this situation knowing that there was no way to break the cycles unless something happened that the kids could prove themselves through it. It's hard to say, but I thought it was a good ending to the episode. Episode 4, The Man I Remember. And this is another note for writers. It starts with a phone call where we learn PJ is another name for Howl. And this is just another example of great writing because this makes us feel like Howl lived another life. That we don't really know the full story, so it's a good having a character be unveiled later in your story to have another name or to have gone by another name. I think is a good technique to communicate a lot very quickly. That Howl had a different life, that we don't know the full story, and so on. So it's a really good hook. And also notice how Sandra, Howl's cousin, who's calling Brett here, she has this part where sees Brett says he's doing a podcast, and she's like, I don't know what a podcast is. Again, really funny, hilarious, and it helps us identify really fast the kind of person Sandra is. Also by her tone of voice, we can see some upper class. She's kind of clueless. She's behind the times, but she's upper class. It's all communicated so quickly. And also, it should be noted in the song, this line, if you feel you've lost your stride, stay clear, stay clear. And all of In Strang Woods does a really good job of complexifying and exploring what it means to stay clear. Which we will see, staying clear, you stick to your principles, you stick to your dead reckoning, your standard of direction, and that's how you're going to know what to do. You need to stay clear and keep going so that you can survive, overcome the pain, have direction, and not end up kind of not knowing what to do, as Paraquin's mother described herself in the last episode. So we want to stay clear. I also just love, so Brett goes to Sandra's house, he flies there, and it turns out that Sandra is a collector, which again is a brilliant move because people who suffer from trauma tend to hoard, as do people who are poor, and yet also the rich will collect as well, which is strange because it kind of suggests that they're poorer in different ways from financially poor. So you have Sandra here who's collecting her past, she's collecting the family tree, all of these different things. What makes it suggest that, if we want the truth, it's all right here. Sandra's got it. And yet we will find out that actually everything on the upper floor is hiding what's on the lower floor. The version of the family that is presented is not the whole truth of the family that's hidden. And that's how memory works. It's, memory and also how we present our own story. It tends to be that we put the good stuff on the upper level of the house and the lower stuff in the basement. We tend to structure our understanding in a manner that we like, that is most suitable for us. Well, this also is this tendency that we have will be contrasted also with how we tend to interpret some people in a manner that feeds in how we want to think about them. And this is going to be suggested by how Brett views Howl, that Brett wants to see Howl as an underdog, that he wants to see him as someone who's doing good, but the town is scapegoating him. And yet it might be unveiled that Brett is simply projecting into Howl. And in that way, he's not that different from Sandra. And that's good writing, where it's, Brett and Sandra seem to be doing the same thing, just in different ways. And I think that's a literary move. And it's good writing. Also, it's interesting because Sandra, she contrasts well with Peregrine in that Sandra doesn't want to lose anything, where, Peregrine has lost a brother she cannot get back. But we also have this interesting, so we have, where Sandra is holding on to everything, and yet in that holding on to everything, she's lost something. Whereas Peregrine, is not holding on. She's not like hoarding or collecting. She's instead learning a skill, learning how to be prepared for what's coming. So both of them are different responses to loss. Sandra is hoarding, so she doesn't lose anything again, so that she remembers, whereas Peregrine is learning skills. So they're different reactions to loss. And we have this question, Sandra has arguably lost a family member, just like Peregrine, but who is better off? Who's better off? Is Sandra, who's lost Howl, her cousin, or is Peregrine worse off, whose brother is no longer around? I also think it's interesting that we have this idea of Sandra can be contrasted with Howl, in that, she doesn't want to lose the quote-unquote happy times. She wants to hold on to these happy times. Whereas with Howl, he couldn't stay with Gerda because those happy times started to feel soulless and cold and fake. So there is this feeling with the happy times, that song in the background, that it feels so fake, and that suggests what it felt. It feels very fake to us, and we can suppose that Howl felt a similar feeling eventually when he was around Gerda, where it just felt kind of fake. And so I think that was nice, because those two parts of In Strang Woods spoke to one another without being overt. Also, for the writers out there, notice this little detail where the vinyl player doesn't work the first time, and that just adds so much character to Sandra and atmosphere to the home. And it also is almost like memory. Memories don't work the first time. When we recall them, we tend to remember the pain. We tend to remember pain first, and then we have to quickly hide it. So likewise with the vinyl player, it doesn't work, and then you hit it and it works. So it can be with memory. And another amazing detail is how it gets stuck at the end. The Happy Time song gets stuck. It doesn't get to finish. The resolution note doesn't happen. It kind of suggests that Sandra can't tie everything into a nice bow. I really like that detail. That's another good example of writing, and I also think just the variety of music genres featured in Strang Woods is stunning. We have jazz, all these different types, really well done. I think also that song, There's Nothing Like a War, it just impressively blends the lyrics of a war between nations with a war and family. That's really great. I also like how the children, the twins, Howl's sisters, who die, Charity and Mercy, suggesting that Charity and Mercy died inside of Howl. Now, the next song we have is this really great one called In the Dark with Him, and I really think it's a great song, and I think the key lyric is, in fact, in the dark with him, which is a really loaded phrase, because we're in the dark. When we're in the dark, that can mean we're ignorant and oblivious. Brett sings in a way that suggests he has hope in Howl, but it will soon turn out to be the case that he may be ignorant about Howl's true past, and that the reason he's able to be hopeful in Howl and project into him is precisely that he's in the dark with him, that he's ignorant. He doesn't know the full story. And there's this idea that the darkness in life, or we had to push through the pain. Darkness represents pain. But if you push through the darkness into the light, then you find out the truth, and you might lose that darkness that you need to stay ignorant and continue hoping and continue projecting. So there's all these literary ironies embedded in the song on in the dark with him, in the ignorance, not knowing the full story. I just think it's magnificent. There's this idea that how Brett says, how teaches us to live with the pain. But is that true? Because Howl ran from Gerda. Didn't Gerda and that fakeness cause him pain, and he ran from it? So maybe Brett's being idealistic. Hard to say. And I love this part where Brett's like, there's no room for doubt in the song and he leaves, if I just believe. So no room for doubt. Well, when we have this certainty, we know what to do. We don't end like Peregrine's mother, but also this space in which we have no doubt is ignorance, is arguably darkness, ignorance. And when we know the truth, we end up doubting, because things turn out so complex and difficult that it's not easy to know what to do. So there's this idea that it's in the darkness, in ignorance, that we have no room for doubt. But that doubt could be a problem. And that doubt, no room for doubt, sounds like staying clear, and it's going to overlay with staying clear. And so we're clear when we don't have doubts, but that could be a sign that we're ignorant, or that we're sticking to our principles, which might end up getting people killed, as could be the case with Howl. We could find out with the character of Howl here shortly that staying clear could be what gets people killed. And is that really a good thing? So that idea is complexified. I'll say I really love Brett's singing. He says there's nothing can break through, and then Brett, Sandra interrupts. Really good writing there. Really good writing. And then I love the idea of the real collection as they descend into the basement, which is, it's just great dialogue. The way he says it is he kind of giggles, real collection, but there's truth. Like the memories we display are not the real ones, but the ones we hide under the display. Those are the reality. And I also think it's important that, they go into the basement, and it's dark down there. It's indeed dark down there. So this is a different kind of darkness, as opposed to they're sitting by the campfire in a blanket with Howl, and that's kind of romanticized. Well, now they're going into the darkness where they learn the truth of Howl. So you have this darkness where you sit with Howl, and you push, you sit with the pain. But now they're going into the darkness of revelation, of learning a truth. So which darkness do we want? Which not all darknesses are the same. And I really love the detail also where they can't keep out the damp Boston winter when they go into the basement, which suggests here in the darkness, the cold, damp Boston winter can't be kept out. this suggests that the basement is symbolically tied to the forest that the children are trying to survive in and navigate. So likewise, the memories we try to hide are ones we have to navigate and survive. So it's a really good symbolic connection there. And the episode leaves us all wondering if we've been in the dark the whole time about Howl, in our very feeling of knowing him. We're all in the dark with him, about him. The story makes us wonder. And again, this beautiful part where we found out that Howl let them die, and then they let them die, and then Peregrine's song comes through. If you feel you've lost your stride, principles can be your guide. Stay clear. That is so unbelievably brilliant, because it would suggest that Howl let those people die precisely because he was staying clear, and he let his principles be his guide. So we've been told that we need to stay clear, so that we know what to do, so that we survive. But here it's suggested that same way of doing things can be murderous, can be a disaster. So again, this is literature. In Strang Woods is complexifying its own ideas, and I just find that really marvelous. And so now we come to episode 5, the final. It starts in a very smart way. Brett arrives back from Sandra's too late to see the opening ceremony for the final exercise with Peregrine and the others. By doing this, the writers start the episode off with this feeling that it's already too late, that time is running out, so it's a great start. And something I really love is how this episode is going to mix in and incorporate previous songs, previous tracks. That's really also a great strategy to end a series, because it makes it feel like a culmination. It makes it feel like it really is final, and also by doing that, it makes it feel like you've earned the final episode, because you can't really get the references or the new tracks unless you listen to the whole series. You can't really get all the tracks or the references or allusions, so it feels like you're being rewarded for seeing ISW until the end. So it's a really good strategy to bring back the old tracks and to reprise them in new ways. Really smart. I also really like this part where Brett, he makes a commentary that suggested Howl's training sort of assured the kids were fine. But then he says, but hope can be like a cloud, blocking out better judgment, liable to break at any moment. This connection of cloud with hope, and that hope can be a problem, is also very good. It will tie into the song In a Clearing, where they talk about the chaos of clouds, which makes me think about how hope can be kind of chaotic. It's not really clear what direction you should go in, that hope is not always the best dead reckoning, if you will, the best objective standard, but then at the same time it seems like hope is necessary. So in what should we ground it? And that's a question we'll have to return to, but associating clouds with hope here is great, because also clouds are what bring in the snow that causes the final to become so much more difficult. So the hope is what gets people into trouble, in the same way that Peregrine's hope in herself, that she and the others could overcome the final, is what gets them into trouble, that hope in oneself. So it can seem kind of foolish, but then again, hope seems like something we need. So Peregrine admits to thinking, this is harder than I thought it would be, and then it hit me how stupid of an idea this was. Yeah, exactly. And then this brings to mind what her mom said in episode 3 about not knowing what to think anymore, how she's not able to trust her own judgment to know what's right anymore. And it feels like now Peregrine is having a similar realization now that she's out in the woods, which begs the question, can any of us ever really stay clear, really be focused on something, and be 100% sure in what we're doing, and it not be some kind of self-deception? It's not so clear. And we have this idea now of a man who cannot be saved. That's been a song track, and now it feels like the children who cannot be saved. The town races out to find the kids who are out there in the snowstorm. And this brings us back to episode 1, where everyone runs to the woods, as Howl talks about seeing people do, and how dangerous it is. Is the town really making things better by running out there? It's not clear. But would they really just stay and do nothing? This is the issue of relationships. Once you have relationships with people, you're going to do something, even if you're not equipped to do something. And that gets us back to this interesting dilemma of, should we be prepared or vulnerable? Because if we're vulnerable, if we have relationships, we're vulnerable to feeling like we need to make a decision to run out into the woods, even if we're not equipped. Is that to be prepared for life? that this is a hanging question. I think I love also how in Peregrine, the reprise of her early song, she laments, "I left them alone, trapped in my disaster." That's so brilliant because it's the song alone, but now she's talking about she getting the other kids trapped in her disaster. That's a really great reprisal, and it makes us wonder if, in fact, all the kids are trapped in Howl's disaster, if we can take it up another notch. I really also like where Peregrine managed to find the clearing, so they all agreed to meet at this clearing, but no one is there. And this does bring to mind the lyric for me of "Stay Clear," which was overlaid in the last episode with sticking to principles, which in Howl's case seemed to have gotten people killed, with the drums and the barrels and the small cracks he said nothing about. So there's this idea where staying clear can be what clears out people. That's, we stay clear by getting people out of our lives, which seems to be the strategy Howl went with, and that kind of is represented by this clearing. So we have this idea here that clearing and being away from people, or people not being there, go together. What's interesting here is that not finding people is upsetting. It's not good for Peregrine. So again, we have a complexification of the symbol. I also, I really like the dialogue from Peregrine when she says, "It feels like you can't shake off a nightmare like all day." And this is when she's talking about being lost. I mean, you're so sure you're heading in one direction, and then you see the same group of trees that you passed an hour before. Your brain starts to overload, shut down. It's terrible. I really like that. And eventually a wolf saves the children. It's a wolf leading them to water. And there's something by this that almost suggests it's danger which guides us. It's a threat which guides us, in the same way that the bear incident in episode 3 helped guide the town into knowing if they should trust the kids or not. This wolf is guiding the kids back to safety. And there's something about how danger teaches us to stay clear, and how it kind of makes us focus on what we need to do. But then, of course, if on the other hand, if you're not prepared, danger can just get you killed. And then we still have this tension of how staying clear and focusing on what you believe can get people killed. So we have this complexification of the idea, which is, again, a literary move. When Peregrine is worried about never finding Eric, the overlay of the song lyric, "I'll probably always think about it" from episode 1 was yet another example of genius. Again, you really felt there for a minute that Eric was in trouble. And then how she pulls in Brett, where she's like, "Yeah, well, good intentions don't take away responsibility," because Brett is like, you had good intentions in what you did. And she's like, "Well, but that doesn't mean I'm not responsible." I thought that was great. And then it was also jarring when she kind of puts it on Brett. It's like, you encouraged this. You were okay with this happening. And it makes us think, as the audience, didn't we encourage it as well? Didn't we want it to happen? And then Brett has a really good reflection on what we do when we, on some things that can happen when we're calming, soothing a grieving friend. The whole episode then, with all the twists and turns of who lives, who dies, all of this is just really brilliant writing. And then there's this exploration of the dilemma between honoring a person's memory and moving on. And I think that's really hard. That's not always explained very well on what we should do in life. And I appreciated this work exploring that dilemma. The song "In a Clearing," which is one of the final tracks of In Strang Woods, is beautiful, and it responds wonderfully. I think it just really responds well to Howl's story. And the song from episode 2, "Something So Pure." Howl really left Gerda because of the joy and happiness. It felt fake and stolen. Here, Brett sings, reflecting on loss, "Something good never stays feeling good." And so it's kind of like, so for Howl, being with Gerda, it didn't stay feeling good. It eventually felt fake, and that's why he had to go. And Peregrine sings this part where he says, "It feels like being happy after devastation or sadness can feel like tricking your brain to believe that the pain won't come back again. But it does come back again." And so we have reason based from this song, we have a way to understand Howl, in that he too probably felt like he was tricking his brain with Gerda, and that's why he had to go. So this song really responds well to something so pure. And it's also going to give us grounds for resolving, I think, the central dilemma or one of the central dilemmas of ISW, as we'll explore in the conclusion. And so Peregrine heads off to college in the final episode, and most of us associate college with preparing for life. But after Peregrine's adventure, and all her training to get ready for the final, and arguably that wasn't enough, we're all left to ask if anyone really is ever prepared for life, whether we go to college, whether we don't, whether we, gain survival skills, whatever. Does anyone really get prepared for life? And if not, does that mean there's no other way to live than to be vulnerable? And if so, what does that mean for us? Where will we go? Goethe sang in episode 3, and that's, I think, a question we're left with ourselves. And so we reach the conclusion of In Strang Woods. Again, a year after In Strang Woods came out, I find myself still amazed by it. New details I missed, new subtle plays on words, new multiple meanings. Like all great works, revisiting In Strang Woods feels like visiting it for the first time. If I was forced to focus on a single question that In Strang Woods leaves me asking, though, an overarching idea, I think I might say the following. Is it better to be prepared or to be vulnerable? The point of being prepared is to avoid hurt, to avoid getting caught in a situation you can't escape from, to avoid being vulnerable. But if we really wanted to avoid being vulnerable, we'd have to avoid people. Each one of us is trapped in a pressure cooker of ourselves, dealing with thoughts that rush through our minds before we have a chance to stop them, dealing with these feelings that come and go. It can feel like we ourselves are strange woods that we're lost inside. How do we navigate our feelings? How do we know what to think? It can feel like the greatest challenge in the world. And if we invite people into our lives, then we must deal with their problems, feelings, thoughts, and emotions too, all of which can cause us to lose a hold on whatever stability we manage in ourselves. Worse yet, if we start to care about people and something happens to them, could we ever recover? The thoughts, the feelings, the experiences, the this, as Peregrine calls it, the this. We'd have to bear that. How could we ever survive? Perhaps it's best simply to escape civilization and isolate ourselves, as we see in Howl. Maybe alone we could get a grip on ourselves, and if we accomplish that, we'd be all good. Our accomplishment of self-discipline couldn't be taken from us. We'd be alone, but we wouldn't be lost. Is it best that way? Is this the best response to pain? To be alone? I think 2020 taught us all that none of us can be prepared for everything life can throw at us. And none of us really understand how tough and dark things can get, especially at critical times. I really think when those times happen, we can all be caught off guard. And I think if we take that seriously, we can understand again why Howl left Goethe, which can be so confusing to us. He really took in the horrors of what humanity was capable of. And he couldn't help but feel like happiness was a kind of denial of what humanity could do to itself. He saw with his own eyes how lost humanity was, all while humanity felt to itself like it was going in the right direction. For Howl, the dead reckoning humanity oriented and directed itself according to was anything but a reckoning with death. All humanity ever did was cause death. But then Howl met Peregrine, a girl who wanted to learn what he had to offer, and he decided to open himself up to society again. Howl had decided that the only way really to be prepared for humanity was to avoid it. To stay in the quiet that he mentions loving in episode 1. And if we really take seriously some of the dark things that he saw, maybe that isolationism is indeed the answer. Maybe that's the way to go. But then again, under COVID, we've seen how there's something about isolationism that doesn't work, or that feels like we're missing something that we really deeply need in order to get by in this life. But if we are going to be in relationship with people, that means we have to be vulnerable to what happens to them, what they do to us, what they say. There is a necessary vulnerability that is part of relationships. And yet, that makes it seem as if we're not prepared for life if we know people, if we have relationships. Each one of us is a strange woods. That's why I really like the title, because each one of us is a kind of strange woods to ourselves that we are lost in, and the world feels like a strange wood. So it's just you're lost upon being lost. And, it does feel like the world's going to fall apart. So should we begin learning survival skills, stocking up on supplies, and learning self-sufficiency? Should we get ready for the coming collapse, inflation, different conflicts that could emerge in the Pacific theater, maybe with Taiwan and different things? What should we do? But, if we get ready, if we do the work to become like a Howl and the world does start to fall apart, if we know anyone, if we have families and friends, it seems pretty inevitable that they're going to knock on the door and want help. And what will we do? If they're not prepared themselves, they may slow us down. They may just get everyone killed. This is a real dilemma that we'd face. So it would almost seem like the only way to really be prepared for the worst of the worst is to be utterly alone and isolated. Is that what we should do? Is that the best way to survive the strange woods of life, alone? It can seem like we don't have to choose between preparedness and vulnerability, as this question that lingers makes us seemingly have to ask. But the more extreme the situation life throws at us, the more it becomes clear that this might be the choice between vulnerability and being prepared. So what do we want to do? Do we want to be like Howl? Is that the way to go? But what would that mean exactly? Is this the answer to modern life? In Strang Woods leaves us with a question. Did Howl survive the final? And did he go off to find Gerda or to find Gerda's grave? If so, did maybe Peregrine teach Howl something? Did Peregrine teach Howl that being so closed off to the world is not the answer, even though it can feel like it's the answer? Maybe Howl learned something from Peregrine. As Howl left, Gerda begged him to don't go. Peter, stay here. I love you. Don't go. And Howl did tell us that when Gerda invites you, you go. But he walked away from her invitation to love that day. But in the end, if he did, in fact, go back to Gerda, maybe he didn't ultimately turn down her invitation. Maybe in the end, he did, in fact, go, because when Gerda invites you, you go. Or did he die in those strange woods out there in the forest that day? Or did he decide to leave and venture into perhaps stranger woods? What about us? What did we learn from his life and In Strang Woods? To close, staying clear has been complexified throughout ISW, sometimes delineated as positive and other times delineated as problematic. Howl stayed clear of civilization, and he stayed clear in his mind when he stuck to his principles and said nothing about the damaged barrels in episode 4. Peregrine stayed clear in her commitment to the final, only to go out into the woods and realize it was a foolish idea. Is it good to know what to think, then? The alternative seems problematic, too, which we see in Peregrine's mom when she says, I've lost faith in my ability to know what to do. The modern world as a whole feels like it's going a similar sentiment of not knowing what to do, so what in the world is right? Well, I think the final track, In a Clearing, offers us an answer. Softly, we hear that lyric, what if right now, Brett sings, with loved ones around, we decide to let some light in. And then a key inversion is introduced. We'd be stronger the next time a blizzard begins. So the idea that we must choose between relationships and preparedness is thus deconstructed. This song suggests that vulnerability makes us stronger. Vulnerability makes us stronger. It makes us more prepared. In a clearing, in a break from the trees, in the arms of someone. For all of In Strang Woods, we've been made to feel that we must choose between relationships and being prepared for life. But in the end, it turns out that we can only be prepared for life with help and love from others. The thematic dilemma of In Strang Woods is beautifully and brilliantly resolved. In life, the answer is not to be clear of others, but to be in a clearing with them, to have them share in our clarity of life. They are our clarity. It is others that make it clear what life is about. We cannot see through the trees, and the chaos of clouds overhead is not the answer. These symbols of hope are neither clearly good nor bad, to allude to earlier in the work. The clouds that represent hope and yet also brought the snow. Rather, instead of such clouds, it is the arms of someone to which we should look, for it is there that we can feel a little touch of the sun. With others, we learn that surviving is not living if we do it alone. For more on In Strang Woods, a masterpiece, a literary, artistic masterpiece. Please visit Atypical Artists. Please visit the Apple Podcast link. Please look into the work of Jeff Luppino-Esposito, Matt Sav, Brett Ryback, the entire team, all of the actors involved, the singers. It truly is a masterpiece, and I highly encourage you to buy the album, to support their work, because if it is not supported, then we can't have more work like this in our world, and our world needs it.